So a couple nights ago, Josh Anderson did not come out of the dressing room for the second period of play. People analyzed footage of his latest shifts, tried to go back to see what happened at the end of the first period, couldn't find anything, and a couple minutes later, I received this message in the group chat from my friend and co-host of the Rent Free Hockey podcast. Fortunately, sounds like he just had some flu symptoms and was out because of COVID protocols, but this sentiment, I find, is or has been quite common around Josh Anderson so far in his tenure with the Montreal Canadiens, really ever since the trade. But Josh Anderson has had a pretty good start to the year with the Montreal Canadiens. So far in 10 games, he's got 6 goals, which is on pace for like 50-goal season. So obviously that's not going to happen, but everyone wants to talk about game stock. Game stock? Everyone wants to talk about game stock these days, but Josh Anderson's stock is rising pretty quickly as well. And Marc Bergevin is making a lot of GMs probably feel like they wish they had a time machine to go back, pull the trigger, and buy the dip, as they say, when he was available this summer. But is this success he's having sustainable? The case against him is typically made by people Googling Josh Anderson, or those of particularly large brain Googling Josh Anderson natural stat trick. But we know that even though the earth is flat, the simplest explanation isn't always the most true. It's not quite as simple as, 4 points, 26 games, bad. Big injury, surgery, also bad. We can actually dig a lot deeper than that and find something a little bit more concrete. So here is a deep dive, a year-by-year look at BJA, aka Big Josh Anderson, which is probably the very worst nickname in hockey because it's just big slapped in front of his actual name, which in my opinion is the nickname equivalent of the Bobby Orr tape job. At that point, just why bother? So let's get into it. We're not really going to go over these 2 years here because there just isn't a whole lot to work with. He was a super young player at the time, not getting a lot of games. So we're going to start with the year with his 2016-2017 season. By this point, he was 22 years old. And if we take a look, we can see that he scored 17 goals in 78 games, which is pretty good for a rookie season. Shooting percentage quite reasonable, so it's not like he's bound to crash down to earth or anything like that. And this was only in 12 minutes per game. And even more interesting to me is all 17 of these goals were even strength. Just for reference, 17 even strength goals is more than Taylor Hall or Braden Point or Mikko Rantanen average on a year-by-year basis, and more than Tarasenko or Brad Marchand at the exact same age. So 22-year-old, 17 even strength goals is a pretty impressive season. Next up, obviously, is 2017-2018 when he was 23 years old. We can see here 19 goals, 63 games, 18 of them even strength. Time on ice went up significantly to just a hair over 18 minutes per game. I went ahead and did some math, and if we prorate these totals to an 82-game season, it works out to be 25 goals, and with 23 of those coming at even strength. These are high-quality top 6 numbers, especially the 23 even strength goals. Was quite impressive. So unfortunately, things were going really well, but his season was shortened by 4 weeks due to a knee injury. It was just a sprain, but it was enough to cut his season short. The good thing about a sprain is that if you are able to have it heal fully, unlike a tear, it's not going to leave scar tissue, which is weak and makes you prone to re-injure. So the fact that he was able to take lots of time off, get healthy, fully recover, very promising for the future. Specifically to hopefully not re-injure it ever again. And as far as I'm aware, there's never been any sign of that. The next season, 2018 to 2019, he was 24 years old, put up 27 goals, 22 of those at even strength, and his minutes were actually slightly down to just over 17 minutes per game. So some things I want to talk about here is that he was started to actually get used on the power play a little bit. He began to be used in other situations as well, like on the penalty kill. He was on the ice a lot in the last minute or two of a game, trying to close out a win or tie it up. And he logged quite a few more shots. He drastically increased the amount of hits, which was really big. He sort of fleshed out that element of his game. He was 29th in the league in hits, which is pretty impressive for a guy who's also putting pucks in the net and not a defenseman. We can see down here in the 2018-19 season in his possession metrics, his offensive zone starts went from 59%, which is really high, to 46%, meaning he was starting the majority of his shifts actually in the defensive zone. Now, this doesn't include shifts where they hop onto the ice on the fly or in the neutral zone. So it's not the full picture, but it does sort of help us see that the coach had started to trust him more, and he was beginning to get used in more and more situations. A lot of people will say it's not enough for a player to be big. They also need to know how to use their size. At the time of the trade, there were some quotes gathered from scouts and staff around the league, just getting their thoughts on Josh. One of them said of him that he was a giant part of the Columbus Blue Jackets knocking out Tampa Bay last year. Yzerman told me Tampa had no answer for him. And we know that offseason, Tampa went and entirely restructured the bottom six and bottom defense pairing of their team. There's not a lot of players in the league that can help instigate that kind of change in another franchise. And it shows how he was rounding out as a player. But it was just after this that disaster struck. They were able to sweep the Lightning, which was huge, but they played the Bruins next. And Anderson, we know that he first injured his shoulder in Game 2 against those Bruins. He did finish the rest of the series, but we can see that it's clear that it affected his play for the rest of that series, and is going to be important for us to keep in mind as we look at his next season. So his fourth season, 2019 to 2020, the season before the one that we find ourselves in right now, and is the one that was most recent at the time of the trade to Montreal. So we look at the totals like we talked about before. They do not tell a very positive story. 26 games, 1 goal, not positive. And as far as we can tell, the reasoning for that seemed to be a shoulder injury, which was first officially re-aggravated, causing him to miss some time on October 20th. And he did end up missing 6 games because of that re-aggravation of the injury. But it seemed very clear to people that he hadn't really been able to successfully rehab this injury, and it was affecting his play. How much of that was being physically limited, how much of that was being mentally limited. Some of you, if you've ever had a more serious injury, know it's hard to trust that knee, that ankle, that shoulder, whatever, your back, whatever it would be, the same way again. And it was just clear that he was not the same player. He was scratched, he was benched, missed a lot of time. And then on December 14th, he went out again with that same injury officially. And he would stay out until the team announced a couple months later, March 2nd, that he had undergone a successful surgery to repair a posterior labral tear of his left shoulder. And they expected him to make a full recover in 4 to 6 months. So when exactly did that labrum tear? Hard to say. It seems like it seems very possible that the tear actually occurred in the Bruins series. Maybe it was just heavily strained or sprained or something, and then continued re-aggravation caused the tear. We don't know for sure, but what we do know is that belief around the league at the time was that Columbus, whether it was ownership or the general manager, whoever, wanted him to try and play through that injury and continue to rehab it. And they were pretty adamant about this because they didn't want to be without him for, the 4 to 6 months, as we can see that the recovery takes, which would mean, basically you'd miss a full season at this point. And this is when sort of the first rumors of him requesting a trade happened, because he wanted to get that surgery and have it fully healed. It seemed like the rehab they were doing just wasn't cutting it. It was affecting his play. And he wanted to just bite the bullet, get the surgery, get better. And he did. And it seems like that was sort of the final bridge that was burnt between him and the team, and what eventually led to his trade. So it's very clear that this injury completely tanked the quality of his play before the surgery. And in order to answer the question we started this video off with, of is this the Josh Anderson we can expect moving forwards, we need to know how much it's going to affect him in the future. So just to reiterate, he suffered a labral tear of his left shoulder. So that means he tore his labrum. There was actually a peer-reviewed study submitted in 2016 looking at what happens to professional hockey players when they return to playing after having a surgery to repair a torn labrum. So there's a lot of text here, but you can see that it's peer-reviewed by a handful of people. Just kind of the summary, so we're not going to spend a lot of time there. There's some interesting information in the methods. What they did is they followed players who underwent this same surgery that Josh Anderson had between the years of 2004 and 2008. And they then tracked them until 2016 when the data was submitted. The data that they tracked included the position they played, their shooting hand, the games played before and after the surgery, the date of the return to play, so how long the recovery was, their time on ice, and shots on goal before and after the surgery. So they collected this data to attempt to compare the quality of their play before and after. So the results were among the 11 NHL players and 13 shoulders, so some of them had 2 shoulders repaired. The average age of them was 29 years old. So of these 13 shoulders, there were multiple types of labral tears, and some of them were on the dominant arm, some of them were on the non-dominant arm, and they actually found no difference in the return to play data depending on whether it was the dominant arm or not, so that's kind of interesting. The average amount of time for the player to return was 4.3 months. So if you remember, the Blue Jackets said 4 to 6, looks like average was definitely on the low end of that. So what they found is that 5 players had increased time on ice, and 5 players had decreased time on ice after the surgery. And presumably the one left over was in the middle. So you have 1 who stayed the same, 5 who played more, 5 who played less. Nice and average, and this tells the people who did the study that the surgery, in fact, had no considerable impact on the quality of their play. Because if you took a sample group of however many regular players, you're going to find standard deviation, certain amount are just decreasing, playing less over time, certain amount are improving, some are staying the same. You're going to find that average, that balance, and this seemed to be the same as that. Also, on average, the shots on goal per game played decreased by 0.13, which was not significantly different. And there were no post-operative complications observed. So all of that led to this very encouraging conclusion for Montreal Canadiens fans, which is that professional ice hockey players can safely return to full competition at an average of 4.3 months after arthroscopic shoulder labral repair without significant decline in player performance. So basically, the outlook of this study for Montreal Canadiens fans is really good. Now that he has been able to take all the time off he needed to rehab, plus more due to the sort of blessing in disguise of the break in play that we had, one could be quite confident that this is not going to be a recurring issue for him or inhibit the quality of his play. So the best case scenario for him moving forwards, I'd say, would be a continued upward trend in the development, which he had clearly shown before the injury. The fact is, he doesn't even have 300 games under his belt. He's going to continue to learn how to use his size, his speed, those physical tools to his advantage. He's going to be able to continue getting the, fine muscle mechanics of his shot down and improving those. with all factors considered, I'd estimate that he probably continues to improve, maybe even for the next year or two. And, probably won't be too drastic or massive increment by which he improves, but I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't just remain the player he was before the injury, but does in fact at least get a little bit better. I'd say the worst reasonable case scenario, obviously injuries do happen, but we know that the results of the previous injuries he's had, it wouldn't be reasonable to expect them to reoccur. So with that in mind, the worst case scenario would probably be that he stays the same player he was before the injury, which happens to be the monster that in 2018-2019 scored 27 goals and was a major factor in the Lightning rebuilding, reconstructing the entire bottom half of their team. It's interesting to note that he didn't put up these crazy numbers due to playing with Panarin. In fact, Panarin wasn't even one of the most 5 common line mates he played with that year. And in Montreal, the players who he's been on a line with so far, in Suzuki and Drouin, are for sure both, each of them would be the most talented players he's had a chance to share the ice with, and they seem to have really good chemistry. So I would be surprised, even if he remains the player he was, I would be surprised if he doesn't produce a little bit more just due to those line mates. So all in all, my conclusion is that Josh Anderson has an identifiable and consistent development curve that points to him continuing to be a high-quality top 6 winger at even strength. And all of the medical data points to his shoulder being fully recovered and having no increased risk of re-injury. Because of all this, if otherwise healthy and playing in a suitable situation, I think that the Montreal Canadiens and their fans can expect 25 to 35 goals per season, strong two-way play, and an elite physical presence that all add up to really nicely balance their forward group and make this contract look like a bit of a steal. So that's that. Thanks for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you liked the video. We've got big plans for more content coming out soon. Have a good one.